Can you all see my picture? Perfect.
Yes.
So first thing, thank you for a lovely talk. It was really nice to start with this. I hope I'm not repeating anything of what you say, but it's just because I think that we really, really agree. So first things up, right? I have a picture. It's made by Midjourney. It's a generative AI or a large language model. They also do images. And I like to start with, AI is neither blue, nor is it brains, nor women, or points of light. But we have a very specific idea about how AI looks like. And especially AI can't break out of this, or find it very difficult to break out of this. So if you ask AI to draw AI, you will get hundreds of pictures of women with or brains with blue light and little dots. And this I will return to. So first thing, oh dear, my name is Christina Knaving. I work as a senior researcher in interaction designer at RISE. And I'm also responsible for what's called focus area, which is called the connected individual, about humans in digitalized society. So I'm very interested in how individuals work with AI and don't work with AI. And I have a background in, among other things, motivation and decision support. So I'm also very interested in how people make decisions based on the information they get out of AI. So I'd like to start with this, what humans, AI doesn't necessarily do. If we look at generative AI, which I will use as a term for a large language model or AI that generates, for example, new text. Why was the human? I asked GPT 3.5 to give me a joke about humans, and it said, why was the human constantly dropping their phone? And they said, because they had too many fingers and not enough thumbs. And this is a ridiculously bad joke. But if you've seen AI and how AI usually draws hands, it's actually a very funny joke. But it's not like the AI can understand this, as far as we know. And that's fascinating, how we apply meaning to what we get out of AI, what meaning there is and what meaning we do apply. So I will start by talking a bit about AI and generative AI, and then a bit about risks and a bit about the possibilities and future. So first, AI. So one thing I think is very important for this discussion is the distinction between narrow and generalized AI. When artificial narrow intelligence is defined as AI which performs very specific tasks, and this we were discussing in the lecture just before this, right? But this is what we usually had before the large language models. And artificial general intelligence is specified as something that's more like a human. And we're not there either yet, but this is often discussed in what is the end result of AI. Is it an intelligence or a super intelligence? And we use AI because it does things that algorithms don't necessarily manage to do. It can find patterns in complex, semi-structured and unstructured data at a low cost, which is what we do as humans, but we are not low cost necessarily. It can recognize images, faces. It can play games. And unlike algorithms that work with mainly very structured data, this can work with unstructured, like images, or all the things that we output, like speech, gestures. And that also means that we have found an ability to sense make from the varied information that humans output, not only the very specific ones that we usually put in databases and draw conclusions from. But it does not think like us. So this is not a true story I'm going to tell you, but it's very often used because it's very informative about AI and thinking. So there is this story that, and this was told back in the 90s, that someone made an AI to recognize tanks, because that's very important military intelligence, to recognize a tank. So they went out and they took a lot of photos of tanks, right? They rolled them out in different places in the world because tanks are very, very difficult to ship. And they took a huge number of photos of tanks, and they put apart a small set of these photos to verify the AI, and the rest they used to train the AI. And the AI performed excellently when they looked at those photos that they had put aside to verify. Then they started inputting photos that were not taken by the team, and it went really badly. Because, of course, a photo does not only contain a tank, it also contains, for example, a sky or a weather or a, grass or sand or snow. And AI doesn't necessarily understand. It's not been taught that the tank is the important thing, right? You really have to work with it to teach it that. So it would say, oh, it's desert and a blue sky, so it has to be a tiger. And this is very informative in the sense that we look at AI, and even the more generative AI, which is very good to seem like us, and we assume, because it's finding information that is very close to what a human would do, that it has arrived to the information in the same way as we do. And it doesn't necessarily do this. And one thing, of course, we had all these rather dumb algorithms, like this AI algorithm looking into tanks. And it performed well in very specific areas, like Go, for example. And then we got generative AI. And the large language models were a breakthrough. They include text, like Google Translate, to start with. We said this. GPT-2, 3 and 3.4, and 5 and 4. Images, it can do transcription, it can use sounds, and it has an ability to sound much more human than any AI before, and be used in more contexts. And so a lot of people out there, even though you may not be one of them, are going to assume that AI thinks like we do. And I think that is where most of the mistakes with AI are going to come from. You're assuming because it sounds like it knows what it's talking about, that it does. And we've had a rather rapid change the last year. And this is partly because of GPT-4, which is certainly leading the pack when it comes to AI. And one of the things they did was simply give it lots of more parameters, which is a bit like neurons, which gave it much, much better results. And we don't really know what will happen. I mean, one thing that I find so fascinating is that if you talk to people, they assume also that people in the know knew what would happen. But everything I get is that people who worked with this are also constantly surprised at how well AI performs. So when you ask people what is the next step, I think that what you're going to get is a pretty bad estimate of the next step, actually. And it can be an estimate which is much higher than we expect, much lower. But don't expect that there are anyone who actually have figured out exactly how well we're doing. And when we talk about this idea about, AI is not blue or female, I like the picture of the Shoggoth. This is a woman who posted this on the Twitter. And it talks about how AI is a bit like a Shoggoth, right? It has a human face, which is our reinforcement learning from human feedback, where humans have taught it to play well. But we really, really don't know what it's doing behind the face. We don't know why it's figuring out what it's figuring out. So to talk about what AI can do, here is GPT 3.5 versus the GPT 4 on doing different tests. For example, it aced the Universal Uniform Bar exam in the United States. Does this mean it's a really good lawyer? Well, there was a lawyer who tried to put this to the test. Who actually used it to write what he sent in to court, and the AI just found it invented information, it invented sources. But what it does, on the other hand, is performs very well on tests where there's much information. And we had this in the former lecture, that if you have a lot of information and that information is often right, you will get a pretty good answer from a generative AI. So in this case, the Uniform Bar Exam has a lot of, test questions on the internet, answers on the internet. So of course it performs well on the bar exam. But a physics professor in Gothenburg, Anne-Marie Pendrell, who does a lot of work with students on how you teach physics, she has noted that it does exactly the same mistakes. Even GPT-4 makes the same mistakes when it comes to understanding about centripetal and centrifugal forces, for example, which we as humans are generally really bad at. There's a lot of bad information out there. And so AI is also bad. And this is maybe really tricky in a sense, because what has happened now is that people, instead of looking at lots of sources when they go to the Google chat, to Google, and they try to get information, right? They look at lots of sources, they try to figure out what source is good. Now they get one answer that they kind of have to trust that is good. And it's going to be going to be good if the input information is good. So on the former question of whether AI of today is narrow or if it's generalized intelligence. So researchers at Microsoft wrote a paper called Sparks of Artificial General Intelligence, Early Experiments with GPT-4, that I really recommend reading because it has lots of examples which are really good to read to understand what it does and doesn't do. And they think that as sparks of artificial general intelligence. I don't quite agree with them. I think that we have a huge problem in what is intelligence here. And the paper itself calls out there's a rich and ongoing literature that attempts to propose more formal and comprehensive definitions, right? But, none of them are without problems and controversies. So when we talk about is AI intelligent, the problem is that we don't quite know what that constitutes. We don't know if animals are conscious like we do, and we certainly don't know what the definition or how the test would look like to figure out if an AI is conscious. So I'd like to go with this from two people from O'Reilly who said that it's not only difficult to define artificial intelligence, it's impossible because we don't understand human intelligence. And paradoxically, advances in AI will help more to define what human intelligence isn't than what artificial intelligence is. And so we will see, I think, a lot of very interesting new definitions and takes on what we actually do when we think. And we saw this last really happen during the war, when you put a lot of psychologists and people who used computer together and you got cognitive science out of it, where people said, oh, maybe, if the human brain does a bit like this computer. So I think it's going to be really interesting for those who are interested and want to research on what humans actually do when they think. So what this is leading up to in a bit is that we're not getting information, we're getting information-shaped sentences, and they are as good as the data that they are based on. They don't have relationship to facts because they're not really fact-based. They're not fact-based, but they're not fact-based in a sense. So when people ask, why can't AI create good references? It's irrelevant. As we heard in the former lecture, AI will simply look at what it has written and the question, and then they will say the next word should be and the next word should be after that should be fair, and it's not been taken from anywhere in a sense, right? A reference for AI would be everything in the kitchen sink. Everything is a reference for AI. So to imagine, that creating an AI that does reference is a short step away, it's fairly more difficult than that, at least generative AI. I assume that you will have simply checks and balances in that maybe you can check, where if this text lies close to anything, and you could guess at where it comes from. So regarding the point of where we will go next, I think that one thing that's relevant is that many of the foundational elements in AI are open source, more than we actually think, which means that the OpenAI as a company has built on a lot of former open source code and data. So that means it can be easy to take the next step. But on the troublesome side lies that first thing is that we're going to see that they have a huge lead in that they have so many people who have been involved. So I'd say the rather it's, all the work they've done with human reinforcement is going to be a huge step ahead. The other one, of course, is that a lot of the data that you train AI on at the moment is from the internet. It's our data, actually, because most companies have intranets. And the giants who have access to huge amounts of data which are not out in the open on the internet are going to have a huge lead as soon as they start. So I wouldn't disregard Google, but I think that everyone else of us is going to have a problem in actually getting up to that lead. And that's a huge problem for who wields the power of AI. So there are a number of open source alternatives like Dolly 2. Meta has Llama and Code Llama, which are kind of open. You can use them. You can't continue to teach them, I think. And you can certainly not train other AIs through them, which is a practice that has shown up, right? That you have a really good AI and then you can ask it questions to train a smaller AI. And this is something that's prohibited in most EULAs of the big companies. So you can see how they try to keep the lead. So this was actually fairly risky, but here are a bit more on the risks. So there's this open letter to pause giant AI experiments. The one that was signed about, among other people, Elon Musk. And they think that it will result in a profound change. We are talking about the singularity, which is a very popular concept of when AI can build AI that are even better than itself. It can kind of build better and better AIs very quickly, up to a point where what we call the singularity, where it's extremely superhuman. This showed up, this term from the 1940s. It was popularized by a science fiction author in an essay called The Singularity in 1993. And it is possible, but I think that we should more look at the risks that are here now. So when this first letter for the future of life was sent out, there was a number of different researchers who signed a letter calling this out. And what they did said that, this letter addresses none of the ongoing harms from these systems. We have work exploitation, we have mentioned this, massive data theft, we have explosion of synthetic media created by AI, which both have a bias and also endangers the information ecosystem, and we have a concentration of power. And these, interesting enough, there was a wonderful Twitter post, which I don't have a screenshot of, when someone had pointed out that the signatories of the OpenAI letter are mostly white and male, while the signatories of this letter about, the ongoing harms at the moment, look at what's happening right now, guys. Most of them are women and or of color. And I think this is very symptomatic for the discussion right now. So one thing, of course, is bias, and everyone has talked about bias. So I'm just going to discuss this very shortly, because it's, I'd say that we know about the bias that we have the algorithm that looked at images and classified gorillas as black people as gorillas. For example, we have biases, so it means that when AI generates faces, all women smile. I'd say we also have a huge biases in the models in that, what does AI get to be applied to? What do people use AI for? And who is the subject and object of that data analysis? And I also ask about whose bias and whose ethics. When I teach ethics, people often say, but everyone should just follow, ethical rules. And I ask them, is it okay to have to cover the faces of women on an app you do if you're going to give it to the Saudi Arabia? And they're like, nah, okay, is it okay to use an app from Saudi Arabia and Sweden with women's faces covered? No, That's not okay either. So we're not even agreed on general ethics. And that's a discussion we're going to have more and more. Then we have exploited workers. There are more people in AI than one might think, and we've covered this part, but the people who create the material from the AI learns, everyone, us included, have created the material from which the generative AI has learned. People who tag, evaluate, and review materials, including doctors, but also low-paid people in developing countries. We have data theft. AI uses copyrighted data. Image generating AI can mimic specific artists so well. If they have published enough and have good tag words on their data, they are very popular with people who make, for example, fantasy art through AI. One example, Greg Rutkowski. This is an AI copy of Greg Rutkowski. It uses his general way of drawing things, of drawing light, how he draws dragons. So it's still up in the air if it's okay to train AI on images one doesn't have the right to use. Also, who owns the copyright of AI-produced images? At the moment, the American answer, for example, is no. AI cannot, because it has to be human, so AI works cannot be copyrighted. But, and I think this is a huge but, the trick is to figure out whether this is an AI work or not. The final question here, of course, also is it ethical to prohibit teaching new systems on a model that has been taught by using material without consent, which we are seeing more and more, that they lock in systems that they themselves have used public data for. And then we have the problem, of course, is in a sense that if we're going to disallow AI to use all kinds of data to be inspired, because it's more inspired than it doesn't copy things, in a sense. It does sometimes, but usually doesn't. Well, the same works for humans, right? Transformative works is things like fan art, for example. That is a situation where humans copy other humans. And if we close down AI, we're probably going to have to close down artists that use inspiration from other users as well. And then we're going to be in a hugely problematic situation of trying to figure out who is on what side here. Does a human have inalienable rights if it can prove that it created something or not? So the picture is on stable attribution, which would try to figure out, based on AI image, which works that were used in training libraries that it has used to create this image. Of course, it was more than like 6 pictures. The first thing I did was to input my own drawings, because same thing happened there, right? When I draw, I'm inspired by other people. Another ethical risk is synthetic media and the information ecosystem, and I think this is a huge risk. AI creates polished content that looks human much faster and cheaper than we can verify it. It's extremely expensive to verify information from journalists and researchers, and many traditional verification methods are ceasing to work because they're based on things like they're automated, but they're based on a copy, so we can recognize the copy. And that doesn't happen with AI. There's a huge risk of false positives and false negatives in AI information. There's a risk of recurring bias that if an AI model that is predominantly used has a specific bias, it will show up everywhere. And this will affect the entire information ecosystem. And we don't have good solutions yet. This is submissions to Clarkesworth magazine. It's an SF publisher that takes submissions from anyone. And here you can see at the end, right? Here you can see where GPT-4 becomes public knowledge. And the submission just spikes. And they've said that they cannot allow anyone to send in things because it takes too much time to verify it by human editors. Deep fakes, of course, that we know, and this is also a very much discussed question, that we know that we can fake things better. It's becoming cheaper and cheaper with video as well. Here is a picture that's fairly old, actually. This is Midjourney version 5, so it's just months old by now. Someone made pictures of Trump getting arrested while waiting for Trump getting arrested. And we're going to see more of these. And what we see here is, in a sense, that Herbert Simon talked about information society in the 1970s. And he said that an abundance of information will create a lack of that which information consumes, which is attention. And since this is, so when we got digital information, we got the ability to cheaply copy things. The internet means that you got the availability skyrocketed, that you can not only cheaply copy things, but you could also access them at home. And AI has made it very cheap to create novel information, to create things, and is further simply putting a strain of all verification systems. So a lot of people will tell you that, oh, maybe we just make an AI that can recognize AI information. And this is not going to happen, because it's just be an arms race between the AI that creates and the AI that tries to figure out the first AI, if it's that or a human. The first thing that happens, of course, is that the AI that creates is always going to have a slight step up on the AI that verifies. The other problem, of course, is that sooner or later this is close enough to humans, and then we will simply have a lot of false positives, that people who are always going to be tagged as probably an AI. And I suggest to everyone here, you don't want to be that person. There are other proposed solutions. We have AI detectors as such. We have mandatory labeling, which is only going to work for things that people create with the intention of it being labeled AI. And we have so-called shibboleths, which means that if you are talking to an AI, it should be required to tell you that it's an AI, the shibboleth rule. All of these don't solve the problem of both malign fake information, but also, and I think this is huge, right? The well-meant fake information, in a sense, when you don't have the time to write that letter, so you ask the AI to do it instead, and it includes not only what you think, but a number of other things that it had kind of gleaned, and that someone else is going to have to read through that entire letter to figure out the sentence that you were going to communicate. And that's also information society at work. And of course, for all of you who are going to use AI to write, co-writing with AI, it's turned out there's a study, at least, a number of studies now, I think, that shows that if you co-write with opinionated language models, they affect users' views. So you can't kind of can't break out of, you know, the AI's opinions. It's very similar to nudging, in a sense, that you have to use words with flavor. So you can't create an AI that does not in some way influence you by using words that have a certain flavor. Privacy. We know that AI models can kind of cough up, a bit like a cat, data which is fairly specified from time to time. In the large model, GPT-3 can sometimes comment on individuals. GPT-4 has been asked not to do this, but it's not going to be the only model. And a model that does not have rules against coughing up, for example, phone numbers, can do that. So we know that we can use data extraction in different ways for models that have some kind of rules and regulations. It can be done through malign hacking of models, but we also know, of course, that there will be models that have no such regulations. Finally, the power asymmetry is one. AI is really, really good at taking huge amounts of unstructured information and giving you an answer. And this is going to happen more and more. And this is a huge thing in analysis of what people are doing, what people are going to do, what other countries are going to do. And access to better AIs is certainly going to give countries and individuals a huge lead in analyzing everyone's information. And we also know Virginia Eubanks wrote a really good book about how called automating inequality, about how the poor and lower middle class are more often subjected to algorithms and AI decisions. So that's also going to be a power question. So now it sounds like I hate AI, but I really love AI, actually. I think it's super fun to experiment with. I am not afraid of AI, but I am afraid of humans with AI. So possibilities. There are so many information on the net on how you can use ChatGPT for different things that I am not going to discuss that too much, because everyone is trying to make a buck out of how to use AI. And I think that the one trend I really see is that AI is used for individual needs. Most companies have no AI policy. Very few, actually. They are starting to have one now. They don't talk about how you should use AI, when you should use AI. AI is used by individual people to make their life better, or to sound smarter, or to not have to write that long text. And what we call that interactions are desire paths, in a sense, right? Users figuring out how to use unadapted technology. And this is what we see with ChatGPT at the moment. Most of the AI use is people. Companies rarely know what knowledge workers do, and AI is replacing knowledge workers mainly. So as someone said, to replace programmers with AI, clients will need to accurately describe what they want. And so far, it's mainly going to be programmers using AI to code, but they are going to be better. The tide lifts all boats. What we can see with AI and developers is that, and writers, is that people who are worse developers and worse writers get the most boost from AI. If you're really, really good, you get less of a boost. We can see that hustlers who have more than one job. New York Times had, back in the days, had an article about some people who had 2 jobs, right? They signed up 2 jobs because they figured out the first job doesn't really tax them to the point of working for 40 or 50 hours. The last article they had was one of these guys re-interviewed who now had 4 jobs with the help of ChatGPT. And he said that, 5 jobs might be a bit too much. We have the, people writing ChatGPT, the mass shooting email by Vanderbilt University, where they forgot to take out the little text saying that it was generated. We have a few companies starting to ban AI. Samsung was very early with this when they realized that their employees were inputting secret company information into ChatGPT. We have a lot of creative approaches. I'm going to take this because I think they're really fun. We have AI dungeons where you play role-playing games online, where they use generative AI to navigate. So you write something and the generative AI tries to respond to that. You have the poetry clock that has an e-ink display and is asks ChatGPT to create a rhyme for the time. It turns out that the clock sometimes lies about the time to make the rhyme work. African Tales, reimagining a fashion show for seniors. I think that the things that we're going to do with AI are going to be amazing. We have people writing books with the help of AI. Stephen Marsh says that you have to prompt it with an outline because it's shitty at outlines, of course, because it thinks one letter at a time, one word at a time. But it can be used to improve writing, and you can train it with different types of systems to create good sentences. I think it's going to happen, but we really have to think about where we stand. One of the things is, what is creativity? Same problem as with intelligence. We haven't really defined human creativity. So we end up in a situation where when we ask, is AI creative? We don't really know what creative is. It does synthesis very, very well, in the sense that if you ask it to draw a picture of you, but in the style of Mucha, it will do very well. And this is something we associate with creativity. On the other hand, it doesn't really break out of very, very strong bias in its data. So if there's very strong bias for example, the bar exam questions, it cannot really be creative and break out of this. And one thing that happens, of course, is that it's so far we make art and creativity for humans. We are the ones who react. So it's still difficult to know what happens when we have a lot of works and very little attention to even sort out the works we might want to engage with. The human role in collaboration, of course, is also a corporate decision. People used to assume that the people who would be AI would replace, it would replace tasks that you did with your hands, like robots. It turns out, for example, that when Amazon use algorithms and AI to supercharge their warehouses, the humans were the one picking things, and the AI was the one telling them what to pick. Another thing in collaboration, of course, is that we don't really know where humans end and AI begins, and this has already happened. When you draw things, when you do digital art, the brushes will also, in some cases, be based on algorithms and sometimes AI. So where does your input start and where does your input end? The same thing goes for texts, right? How do we figure out that the text or the image is what we meant it to be? And would it have been the same with a different tool? Is something that I think that we need to think about when it comes to creativity. Another one is that we don't really know when we collaborate. This is the moon, as photographed with a Samsung camera. It told people that it used AI to fix your images, but there are so many pictures of the moon. So when you use AI to fix your images, what you really do more or less is replace it with what the AI knows about the moon. This is the original one. When we do these photos that are AI enhanced, we might not know where, what part of this photo is reality and what part is what the AI does with it. And our human brain works the same, actually. We put, when we look at things, it will add things to your picture, like sharp edges, to help you see things. And the AI was also going to do this, but we have assumed so long that a picture is what what you see is what you get. So, for example, we have a crowd scene, and the AI has been taught by movies. And in movies, Gina Davis Institute figured out 17% of the people in crowd scenes in movies are women. If an AI looks at the crowd scene and is going to unblur it, it might use those to assume that most faces are male. And these kinds of things, when we assume that it's actually looking at things and just making them better, is going to also be a huge problem for verification. We also have the so-called AI sameness, which is that AI is often touted as something that can do everything, but it very often ends up with very similar information. I have a final comment about work. People often talk about jobs disappearing or jobs appearing and so on. I think that they will mainly change. The reason for this is what we see in how it's the individuals who mainly try to figure out what to use AI for here. A job, in a sense, is a human-shaped assembly of tasks. Very often, managers don't know exactly which tasks a specific human is doing. So it's very difficult to exchange that for AI in many senses, because they have to know when it's important that the information is perfect, when it's not important. Companies who have tried to remove their human workers and put in AI instead, for example, a chat line for women with eating disorders, have found out rather badly that they didn't really know the parameters of how to to talk to people with eating disorders. And I think, so mainly I think the change is coming from below. I think that people who tell you that they know which jobs will disappear at the moment and which jobs will be added are probably also don't really know what's going to happen. I should note that in 2013, there was a huge study looking into, from Oxford, Frey and Osborne, the future of employment. They thought that creativity was one of the safest, creative works were one of the safest works we had. I'd say personally that illustrators, especially illustrators when it's not, the importance is that they create an illustration that has a good mood to it, are going to disappear in the first line. So we do know that change is imminent, but I'm not quite sure that anyone can tell you exactly what kind of change. And if there's something that I think that would be really healthy, interesting to do research in, it's what people are actually using AI for. In companies, what are they thinking about it? What do they do? How are they working with it? What was the problems when they tried to work with it? Another thing that I'd like to comment is that I think there's a lot of calls. I know you talked about regulation in the former speech. If you know what software as a service is, it's the idea that instead of buying a specific program and putting it in your computer, you're using a program somewhere else. So for example, Photoshop used to be something you downloaded and kept on your hard drive, and now it's something you access through the internet. What happens is, of course, that the control of software as a service, and GPT, for example, or ChatGPT is certainly a software as a service, is that you have no control over how it's changed. If you have access to it, you have no control over privacy because you don't know what they're actually doing with your data. You can have, they can promise you what they do with the data or not, but the data will go to someone else. There's examples of, for example, there's in the creative sector, there's Vanta Black, which is a very, very black color, where one single artist, Anish Kapoor, got the rights to be the only artist that worked with this. So all other artists are out, right? They can't critique his works in a way by doing their own works because he's the only one who's allowed to work with that technology. Venezuela artists who used Photoshop were out of a tool immediately when the US started an embargo towards that tool. So what happened was the US said that you were not allowed to do monitoring transactions with Venezuela, and all software as a service disappeared from them. And I think that the rights you have to the tools of your trade, for example, the things you work with, is something that really has to be discussed more. And this will be even more extreme in the future. This should be not eternal brain, this should be external brain, but maybe eternal is a good word for it too, because it's certainly going to be more internal than humans in a sense, right? If you train an AI model on you, when we can start training things, and your work, right? Whose is the model? If you go to another job, can you bring with you your model? Who owns it? Who owns the AI that has been trained by you and your job data? At the moment, you own your brain, which means that when you go to a new company, you might have to sign an NDA or non-competitive agreements to say that I'm walking from this work, I can't do the same kind of work, I can't talk about this. But you can still bring your brain with you. Everything you learned at that job will be yours. If you work with an AI that is being trained on you, that can write letters in the shape of you, who is going to own that one? And I think that those kinds of questions are going to be more and more relevant, actually. Who trains the data? Who is the object of the data? And who has access to the trained model? And who can remove access to the trained model? So I'd like people to do research about regulation, about better data for training AIs. I think that we are aligning here on our discussion, but also on human rights in general. What do we need for a functioning society? and especially the rights. Who has the right to this? What rights can I expect in relationship to both the model I use, to the continued use, to the use of something which I have been part of training by it using my information? And also not only on AI directly, because often we talk about how to, do research on AI, but I think that thinking about how the world may change, we know that changes are coming for jobs. So one thing that could help is trying to do research on who is most at risk. What does it mean to be at risk for your job changing? When DTP programs came, people who did set type, right, in metal types for printing, they were out of jobs. And they couldn't get the new jobs because they had no idea how to work a computer. When Siemens created a factory in the middle of the United States, there were like, I think, over 10 applicants per spot they had. But the people who applied hadn't even finished high school. And they were looking for people who could run machines. So maybe also in learning. So I think this is a huge problem in the sense that I think what worries me is the power asymmetries inherent in creating these systems that are being controlled by private entities and store the data in privately held data halls in other countries, for example. And I think that those kinds of problems are going to be excavated when we see the really good models come from other countries as well. Yes, well, that's it.